So everything's been sunshine and roses so far on this podcast, but let's be frank. Jameson Williams, the massive trade up the Lions made for him 2 years ago, the guy has been a bust so far.
Jameson's got off to a slow start in each of the first 2 seasons because 1 of injury and 2 the suspension. And I think that trust and that confidence that he built with Goff was slowly coming around. In the NFC Championship game, he scored twice, right? But I mean, that's not going to show up in fantasy because of the time of the year that it happens, right? But you could see more of how his game was evolving and how they plan on using him.
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Lions fans are riding high after a deep playoff run. But this is fantasy football, and I want to know, will Jameson Williams ever actually catch the football? And why does Jared Goff suck so much on the road? I'm Joe Dolan, and I talked to Erik Schlitt from Pride of Detroit to break it down. Like this video and subscribe to the channel for more breakdowns. 32 teams, 32 interviews. This is Franchise Focus, Detroit Lions. Erik, I just want to take kind of the pulse of the Lions fan base right now. Before we get into the micro level, talking about the individual players, how do Lions fans feel coming off of, the most successful season in 30 plus years here as the Lions advance to the NFC Championship game?
Yeah, they're certainly confident, having a lot of fun. Having the draft in Detroit was certainly helpful for the spirits of everyone in the local area. And so, yeah, they're very confident, and the national hype surrounding the Lions is also very high, which helps reinforce that those positive vibes that the Lions fan base is working with right now. So, yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's real easy to cover the team. It's real easy to be a fan of the team right now.
So now let's get into the players themselves. I'm going to wait for the Jared Goff discussion for a little bit later, but the Lions have been arguably the most successful running football team in the NFL the last couple of years, at least from a fantasy perspective. The Lions had 2 top 20 fantasy running backs in 2022 in Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift, and then they replaced them both. And then they got better. Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery also finished as top 20. As a matter of fact, they both finished as top 15 fantasy running backs. And now if you're looking at average draft position, Jahmyr Gibbs is a first-round pick for fantasy. This is a guy who over the last 12 games of last season was the number 4 running back in fantasy points per game. I know his role wasn't that bell cow role that we kind of look for in a fantasy running back. But do you expect Jahmyr Gibbs' touch load, his workload, his volume load to go up in 2024? Or is it kind of what you see is what you get with David Montgomery still on the roster as well?
Yeah, I expect it to resemble more what we saw in the back half of the year. The Lions' typical approach to rookies is to try and overload them early and see how much they can maximize them. And then once they hit that max, to back them off and then slowly build back towards that and then exceed it. And so typically what you see with rookies is a slower start to the season, and then it gets ramped up. And then once they find their groove, which I think you found with Jahmyr Gibbs in the back half, is that's what they stick with. And it got to the point that Montgomery is still going to be the recognized starter, and he's probably still going to start each game because he's the veteran. And but it's more of a sign of respect for him. I expect Jahmyr Gibbs to be getting more touches. I expect him to be producing at a higher level. He's just more of an impact player in the system that the Lions run. So I am expecting more of that back half of the season out of Jahmyr Gibbs. Even though you're going to have to deal with David Montgomery still sticking around and still being a big part of what they do, Gibbs's workload should increase, in my opinion.
So, using our fantasy points data tool over the last 13 games of the season, let's say, Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery each had about the same exact percentage of the Lions carries inside the 10-yard line. 48.5% for Gibbs, 48.6% for David Montgomery. Did that surprise you, given how they split up the DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams workload?
Yeah, I think that was with the Swift Williams things. That was Swift's durability was a big issue for the Lions, and they didn't feel like he played through injuries very well, and so they tried not to put him in situations where he would get banged up, and so it typically became they just trusted Williams a lot more. And in the situation they have now, they trust both backs, and they actually believe Gibbs is a between the tackles runner. And his speed is deceiving because, and you might think he's more of a stretch guy or get to the edge speed guy, in which he can be, but they have no issues plowing him down the middle. And you saw the touchdowns in the back half as well because they're not scared to use him inside the 10.
So Jahmyr Gibbs and Amon-Ra St. Brown are the stars. Let's start with St. Brown for a while.
Sure.
The kind of receiver that he is, I think a lot of folks kind of put him in that slot receiver kind of tier.
Sure.
But I mean, it was for all of about 37 minutes. But the Lions did make St. Brown the highest paid wide receiver in the NFL. When you watch his game, what separates him from like the slot prototype? Like I guess you would call that the Wes Welker, Julian Edelman kind of
Sure.
prototype. What separates him, and why should we be excited about him as a first-round fantasy pick?
The first thing that is he actually, while he is primarily a slot receiver, he does spend about half of his snaps on the outside. Now, some of that is because when they go to two wide receiver sets, he just sets up on the outside in those situations, but they like him inside because they can use him in motion. They can do gadget plays. They can do all kinds of different things with him in order to get him the ball, but he doesn't have to ever really leave the field. You can line him up outside. You don't have to always utilize him in the slot where you get that like off coverage type of thing to get open. He can get open on his own. It's his precision route running. It's his technique. It's his work ethic. They're trying to expand his outside, skills even more. They're trying to get him, getting deeper balls down the sideline. It's slow moving, but they're trying to expand his game even beyond what they do. Yes, if you watch him casually or if you watch in the highlights, you see him, making his living over the middle. But he is not limited by that by any means. He has a wide range of skill sets. And like I said, you can put him anywhere, and he is where the offense goes to first, right? They do run a lot, but when the ball goes in the air, it goes to St. Brown before it goes to anybody else.
So we have a guy in Amon-Ra St. Brown who's a first-round
Mm-hmm.
pick for fantasy. Jahmyr Gibbs is a first-round pick for fantasy. Neither one of those guys is getting drafted earlier in his respective position than is Sam LaPorta, who is carrying an ADP in many drafts right now, Erik. I know you said you don't dabble in fantasy as much as you used to,
Right.
but in many drafts right now, Sam LaPorta is the tight end 1. He's getting drafted ahead of Travis Kelce. He's getting drafted ahead of Trey McBride. He's getting drafted ahead of Mark Andrews. I think we all know what kind of great rookie season he had. My question is, the Lions internally, what do they feel Sam LaPorta's ceiling is as a tight end in the NFL?
Yeah, I don't think he's hit it, which is kind of remarkable considering the rookie season he had. After St. Brown, Sam is the next guy, right? Like they use their outside targets to stretch the field, and I'm sure we'll talk about Jameson in a second here as well. But Sam, they like to work through the slot, right? It's run the ball, play action, work through the slot. And so when it's not St. Brown, it's going to be LaPorta a lot of the time. And so you can see games where he can just take over. And when he does, they lean into it. They're not scared. They're not trying to limit his snap count. And they believe he is a complete tight end that doesn't have to leave the field. And I think he showed that as the season went on. He's tough. He's durable. He can fight through injury. His hands were the best part of his game. The coming out of college, you just wondered about his blocking, and then what he showed on tape and the skills that he learned over his rookie season. He's a guy that never has to leave the field. I think he's a top 3 tight end, regardless of what conversation you have, whether it's fantasy, NFL, whatever. I think he's going to be in that conversation for top 3 all the time.
So everything's been sunshine and roses so far on this podcast, but let's be frank. Jameson Williams, the massive trade up the Lions made for him 2 years ago, the guy has been a bust so far. 25 catches in 2 seasons. He scored, I think, all of 4 touchdowns in the NFL so far, 3 receiving, 1 rushing. He's carrying an 8th round ADP on Underdog Fantasy. That is entirely potential. But
Mm-hmm.
does he have potential anymore? We've seen 25 catches in 18 games in 2 seasons, Eric.
Well, I think what you have to look at is what have the Lions not done? And what they've not done is they've not added outside receivers. They even lost Josh Reynolds and didn't replace him. And they wouldn't do that if they weren't confident that Jameson could pick up his workload. And Jameson's got off to a slow start in each of the first 2 seasons because, one, of injury, and 2, the suspension. And I think that trust and that confidence that he built with Goff was slowly coming around. In the NFC Championship game, he scored twice, right? But I mean, that's not going to show up in fantasy because of the time of the year that it happens, right? But you could see more of how his game was evolving and how they plan on using him. Now, he's not going to be the first or second target. We just talked about that. That's going to go to Amon-Ra St. But Jameson is a guy that they believe in. He's a guy that they're expecting to take another step, and they haven't made moves, which is an indicator to us from the outside saying it sure looks like they're counting on him to be the third pass catching option in this offense. He's got the wheels. The hands are coming along. He's building more confidence. They're utilizing him in gadgets more. And so he's building. Is he going to live up to that number 12 overall pick that he was? We'll see. But they are going to put him in situations where they're going to try and lean on him. Now, whether that comes through or not, we'll find out, but he's going to get the opportunities.
What have they been saying about him publicly? And just to take more of a macro view of that,
Mm-hmm.
have you been able to kind of trust what Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell have said publicly about everyone, and specifically about what they've been saying about Jameson?
Yeah, they've always backed him, no matter what. Even when he got suspended, they talked with utter confidence about him, and they've said that they believe in him. And the thing that I think stands out the most to me is it's not just what like Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes say, but the players all point to him as a guy that you have to pay attention to, that a guy that's developing in on the rise. And a lot of time it's unprompted. And so, like, for example, CJ Gardner-Johnson came in last year and he was only with the Lions for 1 season, but he was 2 days into camp and he was talking about how Jameson has it, right? And he's like, eventually when he gets there, it's going to be spectacular to watch him. And that's a pretty common theme when we talk to the players. Is a lot of the conversation tends to drift to Jameson and how he has this potential. And it's like I said, it's just a matter of will he reach that potential, because he has all the talent in the world.
As we're speaking right now, the Lions just about a week ago gave Jared Goff $170 million guaranteed. He's not the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, but he's damn close to it.
Yep.
The Rams put him in this position once before, and he turned into a pumpkin. The Lions traded for him. Now, and remember, at the time, there were people who were saying the Lions had to give an extra first-round pick to take Jared Goff, and now all of a sudden, Jared Goff is the $170 million man for the Detroit Lions. The trigger man is what matters here, because without him, this whole thing can collapse. Mm-hmm. What is the level of confidence that Jared Goff is not going to be a pumpkin at midnight?
It's pretty high, because I think we've seen it not just last season, but it was also the second half or maybe 3/4 of the season before. So there's a very large sample size where you've only seen him, hit some walls on a couple of games. And so you see that you've seen more consistency out of him. You've seen, he doesn't get real high or real low. He's a pretty even guy. He takes the pitfalls with the same stride that he takes his successes. And so he's been the same guy every time. He's also been heavily involved in designing this offense, this specific offense. Him and Ben Johnson sat down together 2 years ago, and they designed an entire playbook based on Jared Goff's and Ben Johnson's vision. What is Jared like? What is he not like? What are things that he did with the Rams that worked? And they found ways to incorporate that. And then they layer nuances to the position, to the routes and the different plays that they have. They put little tweaks, all stemmed on ideas that they have, but it all centers around what Jared Goff does best. So when Jared Goff sets up any given play, he knows as much as the offensive coordinator does because he's helped build it. And so when he has that intelligence and he has that wherewithal of the scheme, it puts him in a really advantageous spot. Then you look at the consistency that he's had over the last, like I said, a year and a half plus, that adds further confidence. And then when you look at just the way that he's been supported in Detroit, it's been a little bit different from the fans to the coaching staff. And it's built his confidence up because he's confident enough now that he's admitted he wasn't confident, that he was at a low point in his first year in Detroit. And he's able to recognize where his problems were. And the coaching staff has developed him well enough to not just get out of that, but actually, I think, exceed how well he was playing in LA. So you've seen growth. He's still relatively young. He's still not even 30 years old yet. And we've seen that development, that maturity, and that confidence that I think he's going to stick around. This is the Goff that I think we're going to see for the next few years for sure.
So I think Goff skeptics would point out, not to get into the all the weeds of the specific numbers, but you've got Taylor Decker, who's going to be 30 by week 1. Graham Glasgow's 31. Kevin Zeitler is 34. In 2023, Jared Goff, this is per our fantasy points data, had the second best passer rating when he was kept clean and the third worst passer rating when he was under pressure. What is your level of confidence that the Lions offensive line, which we know when it's together is elite, what is your level of confidence that with all those guys at 30 plus can stay standing in front of Jared Goff and kind of keep him insulated the way that he has been?
Yeah, I think tackle is the most concerning because there's not a lot of depth behind Taylor Decker. I think Taylor Decker's still playing at a high level. But if he was to get injured, that's where my trepidation would be with the offensive line. Panay is a stud. He's going to be a stud. You're going to be able to move him wherever you want, right? And he's just going to be good. But they don't really have a third offensive tackle. On the interior, Graham is coming off one of the best seasons he's ever had. And we saw Graham when he was drafted and played his first 5 years here. And what he did last year was better than I've ever seen him. He was also playing at right guard instead of left. He's more natural at left. Now they're getting to move him back to left with Zeitler in town. Now Zeitler is more of what they want at right guard, more of a people mover, big body bully. And so if he can stay healthy again, it's going to be ideal. It should be a better offensive line than what they had last year. They have more depth on the interior, though. If Graham misses a game or if Frank misses a game and Graham has to kick inside, they have a lot of depth. They've drafted 3 guards over the last couple of years. They've been developing them. They traded for a guard as a reserve a couple of years ago. And so they have a lot of interior options. If Decker gets hurt, that's my only real concern about this offensive line's ability to stay at the high level.
I don't expect you to come up with like a well-researched theorem here. Well, heck, maybe you've written about it. But the other Jared Goff, unbelievably nasty split. Over the last 2 seasons, 44 touchdowns at home, 17 on the road. What is up with that, man? That is a unbelievably drastic split.
Yeah, home cooking, right? Like he gets a lot of support at home, and like I said, that support translates to his confidence. That confidence translates to success. He plays well, and he plays a lot better in domes too. I bet if you look at the difference between domes and outside, you're going to see similar things where you're going to see a lot heavier passing success inside than out. The nice thing about the Lions this year, they only play 3 games outside of a dome. So if you're looking from a fantasy perspective, he's inside almost all the time. And the only time he has a cold weather game is like the week before Christmas against Chicago. And so again, a familiar place for him that he's played in already a few times during his career. So the domes versus the outdoor, that's gonna favor Goff. The home versus away, I don't know. I mean, I think they were a younger team. And they struggled away for the first 2 years he was in Detroit. I think they're a little bit more balanced now, but he's it's definitely one of those things where he's a lot more comfortable at home. So I don't have a really good answer for you on that, other than just to say I think there's a cyclical effect of like a combination of these different things that give him more confidence, that help him. The team always plays very well at home.
We talked about all the studs that the Lions have on offense. All of these guys. Goff's not getting drafted early, but I think you can make a reasonable expectation that somebody is going to have him as a high-end backup or as a low-end starter for fantasy. I think 90% of like the touches are going to go to the guys we've talked about so far.
Yeah.
But if there isn't a guy we've talked about so far who you think could maybe surprise or make an impact on the Detroit Lions statistically, therefore it would affect fantasy, who do you think that might be?
Right now, the outside starter at their X is really a bit of an unknown. It's possible that they just use like a collection of bodies there, but they traded for Donovan Peoples-Jones at the end of last year, and they kind of just threw him into the mix and tried to see what he could do, and he did okay. But now with an off season in the system, he's a local kid from Detroit, played at a high school in Detroit, went to Michigan, right? Like, and they believe in him. They traded for him, re-signed him, like, and he looks like he's the guy who's headed to that other starting position. Now, he's going to be like 4th or 5th in the pecking order. But as we saw with Josh Reynolds last year, he's going to probably give you a couple of catches and a chance at a touchdown on most weeks, and there's going to be weeks where he's going to catch more than not. So you're trying to look for the matchups where teams are good against the slot, and then those are games when you're going to find Donovan Peoples-Jones maybe has a big game.
His name is Erik Schlitt. He is the managing editor of Pride of Detroit and the co-host of the Lions Breakdown podcast. The man knows what he's talking about. And if you want to follow him on socials, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at Erik with a K, Schlitt, just take Schlitz the beer and replace the Z with an extra T. I made that joke last year, Erik, but I'm going to keep doing it because I feel like the people listening in Michigan know how to throw a few back, and they've had some dalliances with Schlitz in the past.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, I'm sure you have had some, and I've had some as well. Matter of fact, I'm going to take the rest of this night to go have some dalliances with Schlitz. It's been great talking to you, Erik, and everybody watching here on the Fantasy Points YouTube channel. Thanks, everybody.